Right.
That's just the nature of it. And it can be as simple as slipping on a banana peel and having everybody laugh, or it can be as crazy as decapitating babies on camera. See? My point exactly. Right there. Right there was
But that's supposed to be like an illicit and emotional reaction,
it is.
right?
Like it would be stranger if it didn't.
Right.
Right?
100%.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Intellectual Podcast, where we're just putting just a little dash of nuance to the polarizing conversations of the internet. I'm your host, Jem.
And I'm Renee.
And this episode today is going to be a little bit different, a little bit more somber, a little bit more serious. Because you know what I've discovered in all things, truly?
Yeah.
There's really nothing new under the sun. And as things progress and as things become more relevant, you'll find that how people behave on the micro level is very similar to how they operate on a macro level, right? And more to that point, when it becomes an issue between like nationalities and like national powers,
Right.
The thing that really, the concept that I really think about is like this idea of power and control. People in their relationships struggle with power and control.
Right.
People on the national level struggle with power and control.
Right.
And it becomes very problematic when you have the power to like decimate civilizations.
Yeah.
Like weapons of mass destruction. And you're over here arguing with like these relatively micro issues of like power and control, but like people's lives are in the balance.
Yeah.
So how do you move forward with that? How do you rationalize that? How do you operate in a way that prioritizes life and like humanitarian and humanism versus just like retaliation and doing all the stuff that you feel is correct to maintain your position and exert some level of power? Because like, you know, truly at the end of the day, people, you can't say that most people don't try to exert some level of control within their surroundings on some level. Right?
100%.
But it's different. It's different when you have like the power to decimate entire like civilizations. Like the U.S. has to do things differently because of their things. Russia, all the people that have nuclear wars, and all that stuff. If we want our race to continue,
we're definitely as a species being faced with a lot of like problems that kind of trickle down from the macro to the micro, right? So all of these like cultural identities, national identities, there's power, money. There's a lot of like intersectionality,
right?
Ooh,
a saucy word right there.
Right, I love that word, but it's very true, and we are constantly being faced with questions of what it means. Even just like you see all these like kind of wars and whatnot kind of happening, and not just that, there's just general like unrest really everywhere. Right. Only a couple of years ago did we have the BLM movement.
Very true.
We're constantly being faced with climate change and whatnot. And what does that mean as a species? And how do we come together? But also there's these powers that be that kind of still have their agendas and whatnot. And
they operate for different reasons, for things that are beyond like the individual, beyond what they represent.
Right. Even though they're made up of individuals.
Exactly.
Which is the hard part.
It's a big subject to try to tackle, and we're going to do our best to try to tackle it. Right. We're going to be talking about, in part, the situation that's happening between Gaza and Israel right now.
Palestine.
And we're going to talk about other relatively polarizing issues. And we don't want to come across like we're providing solutions or answers to these aggressive ass situations that exist far beyond my ability to like articulate and talk about. I'm not trying to guide people into the correct decision.
Right.
What we're trying to do here is just kind of open up a discussion.
Yeah.
And really focus on what we on this side, Californians and Americans and stuff, how do we think about this? How do we approach this very like sensitive issue?
Yeah.
And how to move forward in relation to how we absorb the information, how we get the information from social media.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you don't want to hear about things that are triggering to you and it's upsetting, this is your time to cue out. We'll see you next week. But for all of those
I implore you to stay, because I think it will be a good conversation and a useful conversation. Just in terms of, like you were saying, just kind of opening up a discussion. This is something that is happening. It's at the forefront of all of our like psyches, and something that I do like encourage people to engage in some respects. So yeah, it's a big topic. I'll admit I'm a little scared.
For all intents and purposes, I don't get nervous about most things. I'm a little I'm a little unsettled.
Right.
I'm a little unsettled.
For one, it's an incredibly polarizing discussion right now, and thing that's going on. And also just the Middle East as a region in general is incredibly complex, and there are just so many layers and pieces. It almost feels as if you can't remember them all, you know? And so there is like a certain like sensitivity that I always want to bring to like a subject like this, because as much as I like can say that like, yeah, like I've engaged in this like educationally and whatnot at certain points in my life, like I'm not an expert by any means, but it's something that these things are something that I do care about. So it's how do I like engage in it in a more sensitive way. But I do enjoy the way that we're approaching it today, in the sense of like we're kind of going to talk about, the use of like social media as a means to like spread information, to mobilize, and how that has become really like the primary way that these movements kind of get off the ground. So it'll be interesting.
All right.
That being said,
without further ado, we're just going to get right into it. I'm going to start with some facts about the situation. But before that, I'm just going to say, like the intro, history repeats itself.
Yeah.
There's nothing new. So like you were saying, this can be equated to the BLM movement of 2020. 9/11, right? Even the civil rights movement and Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that by the end of the conversation. But I realize that because of these situations not being so new, we do have like some credence to like talk from, basically, or precedent to talk from, I should say. So let's go into just basic facts. So on October 7th, 2023, Hamas sneaks past the heavily armored Gaza border into southern Israel and proceeds to attack, murdering between 800 and 1,400 Israelis and kidnapping 240 civilians. This attack was quote-unquote unprovoked, and thousands of rockets were fired onto Israel at once.
So that's kind of the a beginning, but not really the beginning.
That's the beginning of the present.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why we're talking about this right now. Because it's kind of crazy too, because right before this, they were in like from 2017 to like October 7th, they were like reaching some symbiosis, and like there was like a peacefulness progenerating in that region, to the point where...
Do you think really?
I mean, that's what the vibe was from like there was a guy, the Secretary of State for Trump or Obama or something, one of those two presidents, they were saying like the work that we've been doing for the last something or other, like is the closest we've come to peace in this area
in a minute
since like 2007. Right. And like I have to spend a lot less time here in this area than I did when I was working for these presidents.
Yeah.
And there was like transfer from the Palestinians into Israel, like 30,000 a day, like work and do all their stuff. So like it was moving in a relatively positive direction.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's like also the hard part about this situation, and, talking about like cultural identities and national identities and the agendas and beliefs that kind of come with that. It's a positive direction for who,
right?
We all like being aware of like who's speaking and what perspective they're coming from, right? Because yeah, sure, it could have been going in a positive direction for like maybe like US's agenda in that region. Because, you know, there's a lot of hearsay about the reasons why like they want to like clean out the Gaza Strip and all sorts of things. So it is interesting because it's from the like sure, from a perspective it's positive, but you know, I do wonder from like the Palestinian perspective, people living there, kind of what those conditions felt like, and you know, whether they felt it's my understanding that the conditions were inhumane in a lot of ways
because there was the blockade.
Yeah, you know, they call it an open air prison, you know. And probably that doesn't come out of nowhere, I imagine. And so that's, you know, it's interesting.
Truly. And then to follow up with that, in response, Israel decided to retaliate and declare war on the Gaza Strip and Hamas. Understandably so, based on what you experienced. Because they were saying that that attack was like the worst loss of Jewish lives since 1948.
Yeah.
Which is like, okay, I get why a person that's in charge of this area would feel the need to respond aggressively.
Yeah. I think there's like two like critiques, or maybe not necessarily critiques going on, or from like an individual perspective, from like the Jewish community's perspective, right? If that is the case, that right, this is like one of the biggest attacks that have happened onto Jewish people in a really long time, and you know, Jewish community having a lot of trauma, understandably so, of like their own oppression, and whatnot in all parts of the world, right? So this being a really triggering event to happen, and so it's understandable to then for, you know, Jewish individuals to take a perspective of being really like pro-Israel in this. But then there's also the critique of, so there's like an understanding of the individual in this, but kind of, at least for me, there's like a critique of the governments and like the powers that be, these entities that kind of are enacting said, like, you know, declaring said war, enacting said violence, and underlying like motivations for that as well. So for me, it's like it's an understanding of why people are really upset. Of course, right? There are innocent people like being like murdered because there's these huge power struggles that are going on, right? Then, like, kind of as we were saying, it doesn't just begin on October 7th, it's taken back even further. And in which like the Palestinian people were, you know, occupying this land for several hundred years before the Jewish people Zionists decided to, you know, choose this land, the Palestinian land, to settle in and colonize. And they talk about, there was other podcasts I was listening to in preparation for this, just kind of understanding like the history of like this region, how this even came to be, like the idea of a Jewish state. It's a very like Zionist perspective.
What is a Zionist for the people listening, just in case?
So Zionism is a movement for the reestablishment and the development and protection of a Jewish nation in what is now Israel. It was established by a political organization in the 1890s under Theodore Herzl, I think is the name. So it's just basically like an ethnic group, essentially. They are just like who are very pro-Jewish, like people, like, and this kind of came about in a time, you know, in the, I think even before the 1890s, right, 1870s and 80s, when you were seeing a lot of Jewish people being like discriminated against in all parts of the world. And so under, you know, this like oppression, you know, breeds revolutionaries essentially. And hence the concept and the idea of Zionism and wanting to find a Jewish nation, a Jewish state in which they were not the minority, that they were the majority, and that they had control and they had their own national rights and all these sorts of things. And even as I'm saying this, it feels ironic because then you see what's happening in Israel and Palestine right now, And, you know, at least from what I can understand, a lot of those civil and national and human rights were never really afforded to the Palestinian people as the Jewish people were trying to occupy this land, or did occupy this land. So it's as we keep saying, it's a really like complex issue with a lot of feelings on both ends, right? Where people feel justified in their actions.
And to that point, people on either side can be justified, right? Like how you feel about your experience as you're experiencing it, like your truth and your reality is very real for you. So again, I can't really speak to, or I could, but I refuse. I refuse to speak to the validity of either side because I can understand where both sides are coming from. I get how a person can feel justified regardless of the side you pick.
Right.
The byproduct of the response that Israel made is the war that we get to observe from the comfort of our homes and air conditionings and privilege in America. And it's interesting the way that this information is being inseminated into the population. Admittedly, I had my own predilections, my own ideas about what was going on the other side of the world. And I was like really appalled and really confused as to what's going, like, why are you behaving in this manner? Why are children dying? Why are hospitals getting blown up? Right. But after educating myself on what's actually occurring, I realized that it's like an intricate, interwoven situation where it's like there are atrocities happening on one side, but just as much atrocities happening on the other side. And the reasons why said atrocities are happening on either side, again, can be justified. You talking to a Palestinian, they will probably have a perspective that's very contradictory to an Israeli that's talking about the same thing. Because the Israeli is over here talking about how their grandma got kidnapped and their wife got murdered and 40 babies' heads got decapitated and they're just all this stuff. Like, that's a very visceral thing. If that was my mom that got stolen in the dead of night, you couldn't tell me anything. And if you have like an entire nation that is rallying behind that cause, like think about 9/11, how like unified, you couldn't tell Americans anything. The unification of that moment when those towers came down and we like felt the weight of what was happening was the most unified America's ever been. To the point where it's like it's almost impossible for the leader in that time to like not act. And what do you do? How do you act? How do you respond to something like that?
Totally.
Versus you go to Palestine and you are still wearing keys around your neck of the house that you were removed from, that you can't access because of all these systems in place to keep you from a land that you had rights to before they put people in here that has nothing to do with you. And there's no conversation to be had about that. That's the reality that they're experiencing. The kids that have to exist their entire lives not knowing what it means to live life without a blockade around them. Right. Like, that's an experience that people have. That's a reality that they're experiencing. It's impossible for me to say what's right, what's wrong. That's just what's happening. And where do we go from there? How do we reconcile a situation that is not beneficial? Like, that's issue in that area is not helping anybody. So how do we reconcile that? I don't know. I don't know. I can't talk about how, but I will talk about the way that the information, the way that we as Americans interact with that information and why it may be beneficial, like you were saying, and why it could be a little problematic. Because like I said, the way that these, it's so hard, especially on social media, to have like a complete picture of everything that's happening. I didn't get this, like, my picture is by no means complete, but it's closer to reality than when I started this. And the stuff that I was looking at on social media was just like babies covered in rubble, hospitals getting blown up, people agitated,
Right.
and that is obviously going to produce a specific reaction. Like, what am I going to believe except for, like, you see babies getting bombed and they're saying Israel bombed it. Then, like, what the heck is Israel doing? That shit's crazy. Like, what's happening here? I don't understand. And to, like, take a step back and not feel so antagonized by the emotional response that those images give you, and to look at the depth of what's happening in the area, you're like, oh wait, yeah, that's unfortunate, but it's not just like a one size fits all type of thing. And you can't get that from the shorthand information that you'll absorb, like on TikTok, on Instagram, based on what you see. If you on the other side, you'll see, like, if you don't support Israel, then you're a Nazi. It's like, okay, like, wow, like, I don't even know what's going on, and all of a sudden I'm a Nazi.
Right.
Well, I'm not a Nazi, so does that mean I support Israel? Like, wait, what's actually going on here?
Yeah.
It's impossible to, like, actually make sense of it with the, like, no one's going to actually take the time, like, learn what's going to happen or learn what's happening on the other side, because we are so far removed from it. We don't have to. The reason why I am even, like, researching this stuff is because I had to talk about it.
Yeah.
Right? So most people, the average person, is probably just absorbing information that they're the shorthand information and reacting to it one side or the other without really, like, giving it true and critical thought.
Yeah, no, I think that it's the hard, or the difficulty in this is because even with that, you're right, you see, like, these videos, like, these journalists, like, on the ground in Gaza, posting these videos and talking about what's going on and whatnot. And it pulls at the heartstrings. It's devastating to witness. And it should be. And so, at least for me, it's less so of taking a step back and seeing it as, like, some, like, propagandized, like, a means of, like, pulling at your emotions to manipulate you into a cause. But how do we balance like, maintaining your humanity and also critical thought? And that being said, for me, I feel less like I don't need to pick a side. I have, for the most part, picked a side. I'm pretty pro-Palestine on this issue. But it's not without trying to understand the overarching, like, conflict and what's going on, not just from the Palestinian perspective, but also from the Israel perspective, the Jewish perspective, or at least the Jewish perspective of people who are very pro-Israel, because not all Jewish people are very pro-Israel. And like I was telling you before we started recording, even with, like, Hamas, like, one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist, and there is, like, so much perspective and whatnot to digest and understand, because it isn't a black and white issue. And I guess that's, like, the hard part of, like, taking a stance is that, like, it's then seen as, like, a very, like, black and white stance taken.
Like, the moment, and this is, like, the tragedy, I think, from social media, everything is framed in that black and white structure. Once, like, this isn't a war of political issues, political disagreements, political unrest. This is a war between, like, the good and the bad. Yeah. And the good side can do no evil just as much as it's perfectly okay to kill the bad side. Yeah. So no matter which side you pick, that side becomes intrinsically good and they can do no wrong. Yeah. And vice versa, which, like you said, doesn't allow for the true nature of the situation to really
reveal itself.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, very, very true. Obviously, like, that being said, I think we want to go into, with the episode, talking about really just kind of going into, like, the social media activism and the pros and cons of that. And I guess first starting, like, with the pros of how social media is a good and useful tool for political participation, for mobilization, and all that sorts of things. Because, that's essentially, like, that is the way we as Americans, who are thousands of miles away from this, are engaging in this issue, is via social media.
For better or for worse.
Exactly. So
let them know, because you're definitely pro. Yeah. We realized as we were developing these ideas that I am 100% like on the side of there's nothing good about social media in regards to issues in this capacity. And I was enlightened on the fact that there are some like positive aspects you can derive from this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like at the end of the day, it is a tool, and there are like I said, like I don't see it so much as like it's inherently horrible and there's nothing good to be taken from it. It is unfortunate, as we'll go into, the human nature is take things to the extremes, and so there are and there's also just like propaganda fighting propaganda, so it can become very confusing. But in terms of like the art of activism, there's a lot of like pros that social media can provide.
What is the quote unquote art of activism?
I keep saying that. I was saying it. I'm saying it off.
What actually is this?
Of not recording. While we were not recording, I said that. But yeah. Well, there's like a structure. Like there's things that you do, like when you are like creating a movement, when you're like, there's like a organized structure to how to do things, right? Like, and there's obviously like different facets of that. But yeah, I guess like the art of activism, I guess, is just like kind of the umbrella term that I'm using for like, the ways in which people like engage in like whatever like movements that they like care about, right? So there's protesting involved. There's you create organizations, you do speeches, you have demonstrations, even going as far as like the BLM movement. There was looting of like companies or businesses and stores and whatnot. And as you can critique that as much as you want, but it is a part of creating a movement, right? Disrupting the everyday. Even you disrupt.
So movements should intrinsically have a disruption too.
Yes,
like a disruptive quality.
100%.
I don't know if I agree with that, but like, I also don't have any like particular opinion about that. I've never really thought about that before. But
yeah, I do think there has to be. You have to, because usually a movement is a counter to whatever
the
norm.
Status quo.
Yeah, exactly. That is occurring in that society. So you have to disrupt it.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be as extreme as like, destroying property or people, or because it can go to that extreme.
Right.
It doesn't
like you're
have
not supposed to be rioting.
Right, exactly. But some sort of like disruption, even you see in this Free Palestine movement right now, where people are calling for the boycotting of like different companies and businesses, Starbucks. I don't know. That was the only one I can remember.
With their Starbucks, right? With our Starbucks. Hey, what is that?
Right, it's
over
my
there?
Starbucks. Yeah, I apologize.
I am boycotting.
But
shit.
it was like there's like where you take like a day where you disrupt the economy, don't participate in it, that sorts of things. So there's all these different ways.
That shit is disruptive, man.
Right. And it is. And now with social media, that kind of being another component that is used. And I think it's an important one, a useful one, because of the way in which that you can spread information. And obviously that's a double-edged sword, right? As we're going to get into it. But the ways in which that you can spread information and get word out to a like large quantity of people, right? It's something that is like transcending like borders and like geographical barriers. Like you are able to communicate, and we're able to know like in real time what is going on in Gaza every single day because of social media. And that's something that is incredibly useful to, have people become aware of like something that's going on in the world, an injustice that may be happening.
And on that note, like you were saying, it's also means to like hold people accountable. Hold the powers that be accountable. Right. Like when they started putting cameras on police officers, and now you get to see black people getting beat all the time. So like, was this really what we wanted it to be? Because like, man, that's a little.
But sure, there can be a critique of like how useful like police cameras are, but that is the product of mass mobilization, and like largely like thanked to social media and the ways in which people that was able to be spread on the internet,
I don't
right?
know how they're getting all this footage from these things, but all that's all
Well, I think
over
it has to be
Facebook,
public public
public
knowledge.
domain type stuff.
Yeah, I think at a certain, unless like I mean, you have to go to the courts to maybe ask for it to be kept secure, whatever the term is. But yeah, it's a means, because there was a time, right? And well, this is even now is even a time in which, you know, you do have like, okay, like the newspapers and whatnot who are like spreading information and all those good stuff. There was, because of the nature of social media and how quickly like you post something and something can get out, there's much less control that a government or an entity has over other information being spread. So yes, we are dealing with, in this day and age, a lot of like propaganda being like spread on the internet by government entities and organizations and whatnot. But there's also kind of a nature of, it's hard to spin a story when there's several videos floating on the internet from different angles of what happened, right? It's hard to be like, that didn't happen, or it didn't happen to this degree, when you're literally visually seeing it happening, right? So it's kind of hard to
And
dispute.
not everything can be doctored.
Right.
Not everything is fake.
Right.
If it's like 9 videos of the same situation.
Exactly.
Like all of that's doctored. Okay.
Right. Exactly.
And then it definitely, I can see how it can open up the conversation to questions and sentiments that you'll be posing to the people in power that wouldn't necessarily be posed to them. Like, think about the stories and the video footage that popped up post the Vietnam War and the controversy that was happening then because of the economy.
Right.
But now we're like, was that actually necessary? What type of conversation would we be having if we saw everything that was happening during 9/11? Would we approach it differently? Would we have like had a different mindset in the way that we like wanted our leaders to act in those moments?
Totally.
I think different questions would be being posed if we had more perspective. Because
Right.
now in retrospect, we have all the perspective.
Right.
And you have even like Joe Biden talking to the Prime Minister of Israel, talking about like, we went through this. We know what it's like to have a war in an urban situation, the casualties of that warfare. It's not useful. Like, these people we were fighting were in tunnels too, and we had to really weigh in, and it was very difficult when these people are dressing like civilians, and like the complexities of that type of warfare. Like, no one wins at the end of the day.
Right.
And I get it, hindsight 2020, but the questions that were being posed now were being posed back then.
Right.
Because we didn't have the awareness of what was happening.
Yeah.
It's
Social
interesting.
media wasn't like a thing. These things weren't being, you know, and people didn't, at that time, maybe didn't understand the power of the internet in the way that we do understand it now, of being a tool of education and knowledge, and can be used, even though it's really not always, unfortunately. You being able to take multiple sides of a perspective and form an opinion and see things in that way. And so
and then multiple people putting their perspectives on the internet to not necessarily educate, but just put their opinions on the internet.
Right.
So now you have
discourse.
like Ben Shapiro and Yassam Bolsef.
I think so.
I forget I don't know how to pronounce it. I apologize. The other British dude. Piers Morgan.
Oh, Piers.
You have Jamie Oliver and all these like people that have platforms discussing and bringing people on. That a rabbi and a Muslim people like debating on his thing, which is like, you didn't get that in 2006.
No, no.
You just got what Fox News wanted to tell you about how much money this war was costing.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, no, totally. And then even with that, like, speaking of like cost and like money, social media, like, as much as we can like hate on it and critique it as it should rightfully be critiqued, it really is just like a super effective form of activism. It just like, you literally see like the numbers in that. Even you know, when you're looking at like these nonprofit organizations and the like campaigns that because now Instagram has like this feature, right, where you can put it even into your profile
Right.
of donating to whatever cause.
And $1.
From how many Instagram accounts and whatnot, it's insane. Because even, you see here, like the Palestine Children's Relief Fund organization, they raised 9.8 million so far. That's not even, this is just as of today.
Yeah.
9.8 million
in a month.
Yeah,
in about
essentially
a month?
about a month, 2 months,
Yeah, that's-
raised via Instagram.
Imagine making 10 million in a month.
No, that's
kind of insane.
It's insane, right?
That's kind of insane.
It really and it just goes to show super effective. You have the medical aid for Palestinians also raised 2.7 million. And then even to that regard, then you see it translated. It's not just people, sitting in their rooms in front of the screens, just, posting infographics and whatnot. You see these mass protests all across the world of people really mobilizing and coming together under the Free Palestine movement. Washington, D.C. had 30,000 people show up in D.C. I don't even think that many people showed up for BLM movements or BLM protests.
We don't care about black people, bro. Come on. That's
right. That's a whole other conversation.
Right.
Right.
Not making it about us. It's fine.
Right. And that is just and that really is largely because of social media. Largely because of it.
I would argue it was only because of social media.
Yeah.
BLM too. I wasn't out there in those streets, all that COVID and shit like that. Nah,
I was out in the streets.
You go off, Cole, that's all you. But me, I was I'm there in spirit.
Yeah.
Thing. Missed with that virus thing. Man, I was in the height of it. That was right when the virus tapped down.
Yeah.
That's right when lockdown was thing. People were bored and restless. I was like, all right, do what you have to do. But all those people were out there because of social media. Were you out there because of social media?
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Right. I was seeing all these things, engaging in all this conversation. My peers were, I remember just having all these just DMs and whatnot. And I think I literally only posted BLM stuff for months.
Right.
I didn't post anything else on my social media, hardly anything else, just that.
I want to talk about the Black Square for a second.
Yeah.
Because that was in the height of the BLM movement. And I don't know, I'm a little traumatized from the entire experience.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you guys about this Black Square. So, what actually was that Black Square for? It was trying to call attention to police brutality or something like that. And there was a day that everybody decided that you need to change and post this Black Square so that you draw attention to the BLM movement, right? That was the nature of what it was.
I believe so, yeah, essentially.
And let me tell you the aftermath of that. I had people in my DMs, people texting me, calls of people I haven't heard from for years, talking about this Black Square. And God forbid if you didn't post that when you were supposed to post that. Because...
yeah, it was a big social test for sure.
The moral superiority that people took, if you did not do that. White women crucifying white women, calling them
white
racist.
on white crime.
Right. Oh, so you're racist. You don't care about black people.
Right.
Because I didn't post a square, fam. I don't even know what's going on.
Yeah.
And I had to educate all these people. You're not as racist as they say you are. Who's saying it? White people? You're fine. You're fine. You're fine. I didn't even post that Black Square because it didn't hit the way that they wanted it to.
Right.
Right. So what is this actually doing?
Yeah. No, totally.
Is this bringing the right attention? Is this doing what it's supposed to do? Yeah. Why don't you translate that into something more meaningful? Like signing a petition. Fuck your Black Square, bro.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I think this is a good transition into kind of the negative, I guess the cons of social media activism and how it can quickly become performative, or because when you're trying to encourage mass groups of people to weigh in on an issue and take a stance and all that sorts of things, who a lot of people may not be really educated on, don't really care about. And granted, that is also kind of the point, is trying to get people to care about this, right? it can quickly turn into this very like surface, superficial, performative activism where it's like, what is it actually doing? It poses the question of like, how effective is this truly? Like, what is it doing for us?
And let's go into the way that you get a large amount of people to buy into an idea, right? This is the way the algorithms work.
Yeah.
Taps into human emotion. The innate, most reactive parts of our brain is what the algorithms use to give us content.
Yeah.
Which on one hand sounds extremely sinister, but on the other hand, it's just like, I like pictures of cats. The algorithm will see that and give me more pictures of cats because it's producing an emotional response.
Yeah.
So if you capitalize on emotionality, polarization, you are more likely to go viral.
Right.
That's just the nature of it. And it can be as simple as slipping on a banana peel and having everybody laugh, or that little face that the girl did, like, oh, wow, that's like actually much better than I thought it was. Or it can be as crazy as decapitating babies on camera. See? My point exactly. Right there. Right there was
But that's supposed to be like an elicited emotional reaction,
it is.
right?
Like it would be stranger if it didn't.
Right.
Right?
100%.
But the fact that it does can be utilized to propagate an agenda. And that's the dangerous part. That's the darker aspect of it, because that visceral response is never questioned, and the speed of which social media triggers those emotions and the rapid wildfire reactivity of sharing something that produces that visceral reaction shapes the way you think about the situation, the issue at large.
Yeah.
And without the education, without the nuance that social media doesn't allow for in short forms, like long form content, heaven sent.
Yeah.
YouTube, doing God's work. More or less.
Podcasts also as well.
Tune in. You already know.
Well, like, the educational ones. Yeah.
But TikToks and Instagram Reels and little Twitter. Ooh, man, Twitter's crazy.
Yeah.
Is very dangerous. And Twitter itself is extremely dangerous because there's very little regulation on Twitter, and it incentivizes freedom of speech, which is like what Elon wants, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
I should call it X now, but I refuse.
Yeah,
it's
same.
a principle
I think
thing.
everyone does.
It's
I hope everyone does. Mobilize.
See what we're doing?
Yeah.
It incentivizes reactivity because that's what gives them the much needed AdSense that Twitter needs right now. Poor things. But what ends up happening, and this is a real issue in modern warfare, it's less about what's happening on the ground. It's more about what's happening in the airways. So countries will make a bunch of accounts. They'll have teams of people, like CIA level type people that are just there to create the most emotional response possible so that they can project their agenda on whatever they want to do. That's why everyone was so stressed out about the 2017 elections with Trump and Russia, like putting all that stuff on Facebook, because it changed the public perspective of what was happening.
Yeah.
And they have so much resources to devote into like a country level thing. Imagine if, like, I'm not going to imagine, like, America does do this, but like, think of like the amount of money America has. Just like, oh, let's just give $8 billion to Ukraine, right? You know what $8 billion can do in terms of like sending information out into the world?
Right.
That's a lot of money. That's a lot of resources. That's a lot of information. And if it's not 100% accurate and it's not questioned by the consumer, and you already have an emotional response to what's going on, that's it. You just need one of those things to shape an entire country's perspective about what's going on.
Yeah.
And again, it was shaping my perspective, and you would see certain things that you're like, that's crazy. Like, there was a video about Vladimir Putin talking about the issues that are happening. He was actually talking about the Ukraine and Russia war, but there was subtitles. I don't speak Russian, but the Russian or the subtitles were talking about how he was warning America to not do anything in Palestine, not help out all this stuff, leave them alone. Otherwise, they're going to retaliate with nuclear warfare. That's not what he was talking about.
Right.
He had nothing to do with Israel, nothing to do with Palestine. He is wasting all his money struggling trying to annex Ukraine.
Yeah.
He doesn't have time to worry about what's going on in that. But they were saying that he was focused on that and he was about to go crazy. That produces a response. I would share that with a person that cared about, like, we got to like start worrying about this stuff.
Right.
People getting brutalized in Gaza, a video of people getting burned alive was actually a video from 8 years ago that repurposed. You put the right titles,
Right.
and who is gonna question it? You have the celebrities over here talking about stop the Israeli brutality, using pictures of people from Gaza that are like doing all this stuff. Like, the misinformation is so prevalent.
Right.
And just as it's so useful to mobilize people positively, it's just as dangerous because the speed in which it mobilizes people can be hijacked for nefarious purposes.
Yeah, no, that is, I was even seeing earlier today of like kind of to that point, like, you know, you see a video on the internet or on social media and you immediately think what's currently happening, but that's not always the case.
Yeah.
Like, people are repurposing. I even, like, what I had saw earlier was news outlets. I forget which one it was. I don't know if it was like Fox or CNN using a video. I don't even know exactly what it was. Like military dudes coming in. Either way, came out that the video was not from this specific conflict that was happening. And so it does. There definitely is like the dark underbelly of that.
It's crazy that that nations are diverting actual like resources.
Well, because they see like to like the positive effect, like it's, you see how positive social media activism is and how like useful it is. And like governments and entities see that. And then they're like, okay, well, we need to tap into this in some way. Right.
It's crazy.
And so it becomes one of those things where it's like, all right, well, how much is it? Or you even see like the IDF, like the Israeli Defense Forces. I think they have like a Twitter account and they're posting and like, and talking and, you know, doing all these like informational like videos and whatnot in English, because they like, there's like all you could even that as an example, seeing how these powers that be see the utility very much so in social media and are trying to use it to their own advantages.
Ends, and to the conversations that happen, especially on Twitter, Black Twitter, if you're on Black Twitter, you know that the moment the populace agrees on something, it's really hard not to just co-sign that.
Yeah.
Whatever
totally.
whatever the population conforms to, you're most likely going to think that's correct.
You kind of get caught up in the tide of it, you know. It's like it's just a huge wave. Like once that catches, you know, wind and whatnot, kind of can't help yourself but get swept up in it. And I guess at least for me too as well, seeing the downsides of that, because then these movements, because of like the speed in which information is being spread and people are demanding and pressuring everyone to participate on social media in some way. The downside of that I see is these movements can lose like their depth and seriousness. Because they then become like memeified. They become trends. You know, that people like tap into and participate in, and like a fashion trend, like it's out of season in the next year, you know. Just because of the way that we are like engaging with it on social media as if it is like some sort of trend. And it doesn't allow people to really educate themselves and really sit with this information, really have discussions. And it does to some degree. And there also can be an argument made that like, there's no time for that, right? There's no time to like do these sorts of things.
Arguably.
Because lives are at stake. Right. Yeah. So there's just such like a back and forth with it, in which like I understand. But yeah, it is kind of like the downside of it then is like, okay, like people will care about it for a month, then they kind of move on. And what really is required of these like movements is like, they need to be sustained. They need to be like, they have to like really get some legs up under them, and social media kind of keeps it from getting to that like point where it's really can be like because people are engaging with it in a very like instant gratification, dopamine hit. Even watching those like horrible videos of people is still like a triggering, like it's releasing chemicals in your brain. There is like some interaction in that way. And then people get like tired of it really quickly. They burn out really quickly. I like with the BLM movement, like I burnt out so quickly from like, how much I was engaging with it. Granted, like I said, I hear the counter arguments and I understand and agree with them to some extent, of like, once again, lives are at stake. Like your burnout because you were posting on social media too much is like coming from a very privileged place. And
poor babe, you're tired because you're talking about social issues.
Right.
Poor thing.
Exactly. And it is coming from a privileged place, 100%. I do have the space and the time to kind of take care of my mental health. I'm not getting bombed the shit out of every night. So yeah, there definitely is that to take into consideration.
Which to that privileged space, which when we're thousands of miles away from it, it's so easy to have a moral high ground where, like we were discussing earlier, in my effort not to like pick sides, war exists outside of our morality.
Yeah.
And the rules in war don't operate in the same as rules in peacetime. So when you look at these people and they're committing quote unquote war crimes, it's like, is this an active like, and this is like questions that the entire world is like grappling with right now. It's like, are these quote unquote war crimes, are these like aggressions against an individual? Is this ethnic cleansing? Is this what it is?
Right.
Or is this just a casualty of war? All's fair in love and war. So they say.
Yeah.
Which, to our earlier point, it's like that all's fair in love and war was just a trade-off of the history that we're interacting with. Like people in 1950, we bombed the fuck out of the Japanese. All's fair in love and war. We put them in camps too. All's fair in love and war, right?
Right.
Between 1939 and 1945, 1,000 people died every hour. Until like every day.
Yeah.
Every hour.
Right.
24,000 people a day.
Yeah.
All's fair in love and war.
Right.
Right. It's like removed. It's in the past. We don't have to like really think about those things. But now when it's in the present and we see the not fair.
Yeah.
Like we see the unfairness of war, the casualties, the byproduct of interacting with war in this capacity.
Yeah.
We all have to question like, does that statement still apply? Like when you're trying to protect your way of life, regardless of why you have to protect your way of life, why you feel like you need to protect your way of life.
Yeah.
Where's the line?
Yeah.
Where's the line between what's fair in war and when you're doing too much?
Yeah, no, definitely. And there definitely is like a question too of, we are an advanced species and this is 2023 and we can, this is funnily enough, one aspect of the conversation that I had with my dad that I did give me some hope. In which, my dad is, but the reason is because my dad is a very big, like, he grew up on Star Trek and Star Wars. So he's very much like, we need to stop worrying about what's happening here and go to the space.
I agree.
That was kind of the nature of what we had talked about as well of like, yes, because my dad is very much like war is war. And I kind of err on the side of how, and he agreed with this of like, yes, sure. I'll go to that level with you right now. But how can we as like an advanced species like move forward and past this and come together to then deal with maybe bigger issues that we are as a species kind of dealing with,
which is so
and
crazy.
Can advance together as a species, right?
Oh my God. Because as I was looking at this stuff and how people are so agitated by like arbitrary borders and defined lands and who owns what and what powers want to exert authority in this area. They were showing me this on a map of the area that was just like a space Google map type thing of the area. Green and brown. That's all it was. Just I could tell the place that had a little bit of irrigation and the rest of it was a desert. That's what it looked like.
Yeah.
It's just a landmass. So like when you remove yourself to that point, it's like, what even are we fighting about? You know? Because you look at this thing, it's just like, this is just the earth.
Yeah.
We're just people. Why are we struggling so aggressively?
Yeah.
Sure, you got the millenniums of history between these two groups and the area specifically.
Yeah.
The legacy of colonization and colonization. Colonization.
Yeah.
Colonialism?
Yeah. That the
That
Jewish
people-
and UK people.
That Britain had in the area, the fall of the Ottoman Empire. You have this legacy of things, but when you look at it, when you look at the earth just existing, there's no boundaries. No one owns shit from that perspective. It's like, why are we still struggling on this side when we can be building spacecrafts that can go light speed to another galaxy? Like, what are we doing? What are we actually doing?
Yeah.
Struggling on
Yeah.
our type 1
Or,
civilization.
dealing with like climate change that's going
Right.
to affect us all at some point.
Right. Why are we arguing?
Yeah.
Why are we
And
arguing?
that again, comes from like a privileged perspective.
I can only say that because I'm not actively getting bombed.
Right.
I'm not worrying about where my next meal is coming from. I'm not
Right.
worried about running water, internet connection, electricity.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I'm not worried about these things.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about intricate mazes of tunnels going underneath my country and threatening my fellow countrymen.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not worried about a political group bent on the eradication of an entire group of people.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm going for, which I thought was really interesting, actually. Just a little side note. You think that the leader of Hamas is like actively doing all this crazy stuff, right? This man is chilling in Lebanon, so far removed from the situation, celebrating how great the systematic destruction of that attack on the 7th was. Like, so good. We need more of that. We're going to keep doing that type of stuff. I was like, that's so insane to me. Not even in the thick of it.
Yeah.
But you're the leader of this thing and you're like projecting a certain like aspect of power and you're pretending to be involved. You're chilling in Lebanon.
Right.
Away from all the war. I mean, there's war in Lebanon too, but like away from like the thick of it.
Right. And there's definitely something to be said to that too, because even with like Hamas's control in like the region, I believe just Gaza specifically, but maybe the West Bank as well.
There's a
Different. Oh, the PLO. Is that where is in the West Bank?
I don't remember the name of the people that are in control of the West Bank, but it's something else. Starts with an F, maybe. I forgot. But no, Hamas is just Gaza.
But that like being said, like Hamas like was as a group like elected into office like back in the early 2000s, but since then have not had any like elections and whatnot in that region. So
Really gripped power.
They've held on to this power that who's to say, and which I'm from what I gather, like Palestinian people like. There is like an air of like whatever means necessary to not be oppressed. And like if this group is going to be the people that get us out of it, even though we may not agree with every single action or every single belief, that is what we will do.
Greater good mentality.
Yeah. I mean, when you're in a state of like survival and a need to get out of like in a state of oppression, yeah, that's understandable that you would have the mentality of like whatever means necessary.
And then inversely, the Israelis are like, whatever means necessary. We're going to eradicate these people that are threatening our survival.
Yeah.
Unproductive.
Yeah.
The only result of this is the eradication of one of the sides.
Okay.
No, I'm saying like if I'm not saying that I want that.
Right.
I'm saying that this mindset will lead to that.
Yeah.
Not that. Come on.
No, I know. I know. I was just like, damn, he really said that.
No, like
No, I know
the mindset of this, whatever means necessary for our survival, won't stop until one of the sides are just completely gone. And that's not what we want. That's not an accurate representation of the individuals, which goes back to how I started this conversation. Because the real issues are that the powers that be, while individuals, and this is a paradoxical phenomenon I find really interesting, we want to take this moral superiority and we want to judge these national entities, the power structures of a nation, through the lens of our own individualistic personal moral structure, right? It's obviously if you kill somebody, that's bad.
Yeah.
Right. And if you feel motivated to kill a person, that's also bad.
Yeah.
You, the individual.
Right.
But a nation has a myriad of reasons why they are engaging in quote unquote atrocities. Right. So Hamas is invading Israel for a completely different set of reasons for the retaliation that Israel has on Hamas. And they're operating with the representation of their people in mind, hopefully, right? That's idealistic. But these power structures still run by individuals.
Yeah.
So while they do not operate on the same moral structures as an individual does, they still fall prey to the limitations of human like imperfection.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to navigate because from one perspective, you're like, well, they're people. People need to be better. But from another perspective, these are national entities that are operating for the best interest of their nation.
Or whatever agenda.
Well, whatever agenda they have, which it can't be subject to individual moral inclinations because there's more going on there. It's more complex than what's happening. And when you have one side that refuses to budge and is bent on the annihilation of one another, and another side that wants the complete annihilation of another, how do you reconcile? There's like no room for diplomacy there. And if there was, now there really isn't because of October 7th.
Yeah.
How do you move forward with that? How do you reach a conclusion? How do you educate the masses about that? How do you do it in a way that doesn't pick a side? Is that even possible? Is that even realistic at this point? Hard to say.
Through this, at least for myself, I just want to focus on for myself, holding on to, my humanity as an individual in this. And
what does that mean / look like for you specifically?
In all this, because it is easy to get caught up in these like political discussions and like, oh, well, war is war and these groups are doing that to them and all these sorts of things. And I think for myself, for me, like what that looks like is, I guess, caring about humans. It's really, for me, I see this as a humanitarian crisis.
Sure.
So even like for like a mass understanding, like critique the UN, of course, but like think like UN, think like helping organize like, human rights organizations, nonprofits, et cetera, that are helping the innocent people that are being affected by this. I want to, as much as possible, maintain like that heart openness to those people and what's going on. Because as we were saying, like, we're speaking about it from a place of like where this is not happening to us, but like, what if it did? And we do come, like, America in general, we're very hard to attack, just like geographically, the reasons for that, whatever. There's a lot of privilege in that. And I just want to focus on, for me, I'm donating to organizations. I'm calling for a ceasefire because at the end of the day, these are like people that we're dealing with. God, imagine if that was like my family and like, my homeland and all that stuff. At the end of the day, like I do want to hold on to my emotionality in that. I agree. You don't want to necessarily get swept up so much into something that you may not have a complete understanding of, but still like maintaining that aspect of humanity.
Like the reality that innocents are dying is enough for you.
Yeah.
To like
point blank period.
Yeah. Like all that at the end of the day, that's important.
Yeah.
For you specifically. Hard to argue with that.
Which is why I have that stance.
Right. It's just like, it would be, you immediately become very strange if you're like, well, actually.
Yeah, but you would be surprised how many people like would in their own, maybe not so blatantly, but kind of in their own way, kind of then counter that.
I can think of the arguments in my head as we continue. But I do think it's very interesting too, just the irony of the power dynamic as we talk about like psychological terms and how we shouldn't be using those. But Israel is 100% more powerful than Gaza.
Oh, totally.
There's a power dynamic there.
Huge discrepancy.
And I think that is the reason why people are so adamant about like Israel, be the bigger person, this, that, the other. Right? I get that. Because the if push really came to shove, the amount of decimation that Israel could do to anyone in the Middle East versus what anyone in the Middle East could do to Israel on top of the threat of angering the U.S. is disproportionate.
Yeah.
Disproportionate.
Largely disproportionate.
And that disproportionate power is in many ways the nature of the struggle. Because you have entities like Iran that want to be the powerhouse of the Middle East and exert their influence around everybody.
Right.
Which, you know, to be surrounded on all sides like that has to be a crazy predicament to be in. Like from the north to the south, to the east to the west. Like
Iran being surrounded?
No, Israel being surrounded on all sides. With people that like don't want you there. Or, like for a variety of reasons they don't want you there.
Yeah.
Like the things you have to do to maintain your autonomy. Because like you're not just gonna like, all right, you know what? No one wants me here. I'm just gonna pack up and move. Like, move where? Like, move where? You know, like that's the crazy part. Move freaking where? And all like you have to. I think that like changes your mindset of how you go about it.
Yeah.
But when you can exert that much force with great power, you know, comes great responsibility.
Right. It's not a fair fight.
So you have to.
It's like how is war when it's not a fair
fight.
Yeah.
In that of itself, like, that's the point, right? That's the point. That's why you don't attack America. It's not a fair fight.
Right.
It's in your best interest to leave us alone.
Right.
So if you,
we don't leave other people alone. Still.
I mean, that's our right by being the biggest and the strongest. A very reductive way of engaging with nations and people, but an unfortunate reality of the situation. Because he who has the power makes the rules.
No, this is very true.
And the only people that suffer in that type of mentality are the civilians and the innocents, whether it's on the Israeli side where what Hamas did to those people, insane.
Yeah.
Insane. Like that. As far as attacks go, that was rough.
Yeah, that was. I was really sad seeing those videos of those civilians getting caught up, and
that was crazy.
For sure.
And then on the other side too, like you see little kids that are like talking to the news people about how they were like bombed. They don't know what's going on. Like, dude, a 6-year-old being bombed like has no concept about what the geopolitical intricacies of the region even are. Is like, mi corazón.
No, I guess like adding to that, I think that's the other thing about situations like this. Something that really like triggers me personally is that things are the statement that things are the way that they are, and that is what is what is, and what will be is what will be. And I think that's kind of like probably a triggering statement for most people of our generation, and hence why we are like this generation of activists and whatnot.
Why are things as they are when things can be what they can be? Right,
exactly.
Foolishness.
I don't think it's foolishness.
But like,
I think it's lazy argument to say, well, at the end of the day, this is the way that it is. And I guess like, you know, maybe if there is a lot more discussion and in-depth understanding of like your like perspective and reasoning and an opinion on why this is the way that it is, sure, I can have some understanding of it. It's hard for me to respect that opinion.
Just accept it.
Because why are we like, yeah, sure, things are the way that they are, but like, let's do some critical thinking on that, and then also assess whether things can be different. Have we just been okay with the norm, and we've gotten, you know, complacent or just like lazy with not wanting, because change, like especially the change that we're talking about, especially when it comes to like these movements like systemic change, cultural change, changing like perspective of mass groups of people. It's a lot of hard work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it shouldn't be done or shouldn't be at least entertained.
That's the nail. And I'm gonna leave it at that, because these discussions should be entertained, which is why we're having this discussion.
Yeah, 100%.
How do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, it's a hard conversation to like wrap up, because as we said, we're not here to provide a solution. We are not experts on this topic. We wanted to engage in this discourse because it's something that's super prevalent, that's happening today in our lives, in everyone's lives, or just, on social media, etc.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know.
I think the line that you were saying, that you are on the side of life, is a pretty good way to conclude your idea. Trump said something similar when they had him on the chopping block for that, when he was asked about the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Like, what would you do as a president regarding this situation? Who's like in the right, who's in the wrong? He was like, I just want both sides to stop killing each other. And that was the most controversial thing he's ever said, and everyone was mad about. It was like, how can you be mad about a person wanting people to live? Yeah. Wanting people not to die, wanting people to have the best quality of life they can. And say what you say you don't understand the issues, say you don't understand the situation, say that the time for negotiation is done, we don't negotiate with terrorists. The list goes on. You can say whatever you want to justify yourself, but I think in 2020, in 2023, globally, we're at a place where we can have these discussions, and these discussions should be had before lives are taken.
I agree with that.
And what's the point of the UN if we can't bring people to the table? What's the point of social media if it's not pushing us to a greater understanding of each other and the situations? What's the point of improvement if we're still dealing with issues that persisted for the last like 3,000 plus years? Yeah. It feels like we're back in the Middle Ages and Britain and France are having their 1,000 years war, Yeah. I want us as a society to be more characteristic of our ability to have empathy and to think and to err on the side of the more profoundness of our humanity than to just call and response until none of us exist. And that was the issue with the Cold War. We're on the brink. Yeah. Whoever pulls the trigger, everyone's done. Yeah. Like,
nobody wins in that situation.
Nobody is winning here. So there has to be more that we can bring to the table. But if neither side wants to have that conversation, then what can you actually do than to feel what you feel about the lives being lost and the tragedy that is the situation at hand if you can't change it? Hard to say. And I'll leave you with that. Yeah. I'll leave you with that. I have no call to action after. Like, it's really hard to be like, hey, follow us on social media after all that. Right. I'm just like, well, yeah, at the end of the day, I'm Jem.
And I'm Renee.
And we're the intellectuals. Signing off until next time.
All right. Bye.